Welcome to the University of Chicago. We are absolutely delighted to have your students joining our campus community. And today's presentation really is to give you sort of an overview on how your student will maintain their status as long as they're an F1 or J1 sponsored student at the University of Chicago. So I'm going to try to cover a lot of territory very briefly so that there's an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. I'm afraid that we've run out of these parent guide brochures. We do have more available at the Office of International Affairs. So I have brought quite a number of my business cards up front here. Feel free to grab one at the end of the presentation, and you can either reach out to me directly by email, or our address is also found on the front of this card, so you are more than welcome if you're still here this week to stop by the office before you leave. So some of the items of discussion for today will include a basic overview of the Office of International Affairs, maintaining your F1 or J1 status. We'll talk about travel, work authorization, social security numbers, ITINs, taxes, and information about how to contact our office. Our office is made up of about 5 international student advisors. We also have another side of the office that handles employee services, so any employee that's sponsored by the University of Chicago. And we do offer some programming and events for our international community. My name is Leah Rosenthal, I should mention, and I am the international student advisor that works specifically with the college. I also advise the Social Services Administration and the Pritzker School of Medicine, but I would say the largest group of students that I advise are the college students. The OIA is available to provide information about all things relating to F1 and J1 student visa maintenance. As I mentioned, we also provide services for J1 scholars and most H1B employees. But some of the things that our office does not handle and cannot address specific questions on for the most part would include housing, health care and health insurance, transportation, visas to countries other than the US, and we cannot review tax documents. But that's not to say that you can't reach out to our office and your student can't contact us as a first point of contact. We're happy to redirect questions that we can't address. So if there's ever any concern or question and you don't really know where to begin, you're always more than welcome to reach out to the OIA first. So the OIA provides information and advising on immigration regulations so that your student is able to adjust to life in Chicago effortlessly as possible. But ultimately, it's the responsibility of each student to maintain their status. If you have general questions, we are more than happy to address those questions, but it is important to just note that reaching out to our office without written permission from your student will not allow us to address more specific questions. If you do have a question about anything that has to pertain to your student's immigration record, we do need your student to send us an email giving us written permission to speak with you first. And that can be sent directly to our general office inbox or directly to my email. So what does it mean to maintain F1 or J1 status? The short answer is that you need to maintain, you need to follow all of the immigration and laws and rules for your status. So the first step when you first arrive is within the first 3 days, your student will need to submit the online check-in, and that allows us to register the student's CVIS record so that we can report to the government that the student has begun their program. Another step involved in maintaining your status is maintaining valid documents, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Being enrolled full-time, reporting changes when they occur, and I'll get into more detail in just a moment on what those changes entail, and working only with authorization. So there's often a lot of confusion between what is your visa versus your status. The visa is the stamp that is found in the passport that is issued by a US consulate or embassy. Status refers to either F1 or J1 status. So that is more tied into your I-20 or DS-2019 and the start and end dates found on either document. If you are in F1 status, then you possess an I-20, and for J1 students, you'll have a DS-2019. It is okay for your visa to expire while you're in the US. However, it is not okay for your status to expire. So again, that's sort of marked by the end date that's found on either your I-20 or DS-2019. And it's important for students to always make sure they're paying attention to that end date, because there are certain grace periods and timelines surrounding that date when it comes to things like work authorization or transferring to a new school or starting a new program at the University of Chicago, or just departing the US to return to your home country. So it's important to always be aware of that end date in particular. To maintain valid documents, that means keeping all original forms I-20 or DS-2019 and making copies, because you just don't know when down the line you'll need to have copies of all of those old immigration documents. Anytime a new I-20 or DS-2019 is printed, that becomes your most recent valid document for travel. So that's not to say that you can throw out all of the old I-20s or DS-2019s that you have had in the past. You still want to keep those for record-keeping purposes, but for travel purposes, only the most recently printed I-20 or DS-2019 is needed for travel. On page 1 of both the I-20 and the DS-2019, you will find the start and the end date. Anytime a new document is printed, the student will need to make sure that they're signing, printing, and dating at the bottom of the form. Those are the important things to note about the I-20 and DS-2019. Again, I just want to stress that end date. If you find that you need more time to complete your program, for example, adjustments and extensions need to be processed before that date occurs. So that's one of the reasons why it's very important to pay attention to the end date on that document. Your passport, anytime entering the US, needs to be valid for at least 6 months into the future. So that's something to keep in mind as travel season approaches. We're not there quite yet, but it will sneak up on us, I'm sure. So in the fall, if at the end of the quarter, a student needs to renew their passport so that they have at least 6 months. It's valid 6 months into the future. Just take into consideration the timelines for doing that and plan accordingly. That could also be a problem at the border if you arrive in the US and your passport isn't valid for 6 months into the future. So might seem like common sense, but something to remember. Each time a student enters the US, an I94 record is created. The I94 is essentially an electronic document that you can locate online and look up at any time that records your most recent entry. So if you enter the US and you look at the visa stamp that's found in your passport, and I also want to just note, if there are any Canadian citizens in the room, you will not have a visa stamp in your passport. That's only required for all other international students that are in F or J1 status. On the opposite page of the visa stamp is typically where the CBP officer will place the point of entry stamp. And on the top of that stamp will usually be listed the class or the status, so F1 or J1. Underneath, it should say D/S, which stands for duration of status. That's the admit until date. So if you notice that the visa status is incorrectly listed on that entry stamp, found again opposite to your visa stamp in your passport, if either of those two details are incorrect, if you see a date listed, for example, then the next step is to get online and check your I94 record to make sure that that reflects your entry correctly. So in some cases, the entry stamp might say B2, for example. That's a common visa status that students may have entered the US in prior to being in F or J1 status. So if you, and this does happen from time to time, CBP officers are always stamping and moving very quickly, and so sometimes these little details are not recorded properly. So make sure to check that so that you can reach out to the OIA if there are any problems, and we can put you in touch with the CBP Deferred Inspection site. And they can correct that to make sure that everything looks proper in your CVIS record. The visa stamp should have, under the entries category, M listed, which stands for multiple entries. If for some reason you don't see that, you can reach out to let us know. But in most cases, you should have a visa stamp that is valid for multiple entries. The visa expiration date is something that students should also always be aware of. As I mentioned earlier, it's perfectly fine for your visa to expire while you're inside the US. You cannot renew your visa from within the US, but if you travel and you plan on re-entering an F1 or J1 status, you do need to make arrangements to apply for a new visa before you return, because that's another area where you might run into problems at the border if you do not have a valid visa stamp. I mentioned that another opportunity to contact the OIA would be to report any types of changes. So one of those changes, as I mentioned, would be extending your I-20 or DS-2019 if necessary. If you find that you've reached that 4th year of enrollment and you need to retake a class, or perhaps you've added a major or something like that that would necessitate an additional quarter or quarters, that would be an opportunity to reach out to the Office of International Affairs. We have an online request for extending your I-20 or DS-2019, and that will also be handled in conjunction with the College Dean of Students office. So that is something that we can help students, as long as they contact us before that I-20 or DS-2019 end date. It is not possible to extend your immigration document after that date. To maintain F1 or J1 status, all students must be enrolled each quarter. So that would be the the autumn quarter, the winter quarter, and the spring quarter. The summer quarter is considered a vacation quarter, so enrollment during that quarter is not required. But if there are any times when there may be some situations under which a student may be authorized to drop below full-time enrollment. For example, if there's a medical reason to do so, if the student's in their last quarter of enrollment and they only need 1 or 2 classes to complete their degree, we can process authorization for that, but that does need to be brought to our attention first, and the authorization is granted in the form of a new I-20. Another change that would need to be reported would be any change to your US address. And there is a student portal called my.uchicago.edu where you can update what we refer to as the SEVIS US address. That's the address that would actually feed right into SEVIS. So anytime there's a change in address, that can be reported through my.uchicago.edu. So we've covered graduating. Oh, actually, we haven't mentioned this yet. Graduating early would be another reason to contact the OIA. If your I-20 needs to be shortened in some cases, that needs to be documented. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward process that can begin with your student just sending an email to me directly or to the office. And we can change the end date on the I-20 so that it corresponds with final quarter of enrollment. And that's important to just keep in mind, that that I-20 DS-2019 end date should always correspond with the final quarter of enrollment. So just sort of to wrap up, some of the other reasons that you might need to contact the OIA to report changes would be if you're changing education levels or switching to a new academic program at the University of Chicago, transferring to a new school within the US, changing your immigration status. So if you no longer need to utilize your F1 or J1 status because you have obtained a green card or something along those lines, we need to be notified so that we can close out the SEVIS record. Dropping below full-time enrollment, as I mentioned. And then there are some cases when students may take a leave of absence for military duty or various other reasons. I will note that leave of absences are usually able to be granted, but they happen through the Office of International Affairs from the immigration perspective, but also need to be handled by the College Dean of Students to make sure that things are noted on their end as well. So moving on to travel and what documents are needed for travel. As I mentioned, valid passport, valid for 6 months into the future. You want to make sure you have an unexpired F1 or J1 visa stamp unless you're a Canadian citizen. you need to have a valid I-20 or DS-2019 with a valid travel signature. The travel signature is found on the second page of the I-20 or the first page of the DS-2019, and that signature is valid for 1 year from the date that it was signed on or until the I-20 or DS-2019 end date, whichever comes first. We offer travel signatures at our front desk on a walk-in basis, so you don't need to have an appointment or anything like that ahead of time. You can just visit our office when we're open, and we can sign your current document, or if you've lost your I-20 or DS-2019, we can always print another for you. So that's travel. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about work authorization, and there's a lot that can be said about work authorization, so I'm going to try to stick to the bare bones. Employment is any type of work performed or services provided in exchange for money, tuition, fees, books, supplies, lodging, or any other benefit. There are several types of work authorization that exist for both F1 and J1 students, which I'll highlight in just a moment. But I do want to stress how important it is that students have the proper work authorization before beginning any type of work. That means they need to make sure that they have heard from the Office of International Affairs, received an email confirming that their authorization's been granted before they begin any type of employment. Working without authorization is a very serious violation of your status, F1 or J1, so it's very important that that's in place before engaging in any type of work. Now, there are two types of work that does not require any prior authorization from the Office of International Affairs. The first, and this pertains to both F1 and J1 students, the first is on-campus work. So on-campus work is any position where you're being paid by the University of Chicago. You can work up to 20 hours per week as an F1 or J1 student without any prior work authorization, and that's that. So the second type of work that does not require prior authorization is unpaid work. So we're talking about unpaid internships, and the reason that that type of position does not require authorization is because technically it's not considered employment. There's no exchange of funds. The opportunity is really there to benefit the student and not so much the employee. Employer. And so there's no authorization that is needed for a bona fide unpaid internship. For J1 students, academic training exists, and that is a form of off-campus work authorization that is handled by the Office of International Affairs. So any student in J1 status is eligible for academic training that can be utilized before and after the program end date. For F1 students, there's actually two different types of work authorization. The first is the most common that we see during the student's academic program. That's called Curricular Practical Training, or CPT, and it is approved by the Office of International Affairs. Any student who will be working in completing a Metcalf internship is eligible for CPT. The Metcalf program is run by Career Advancement, so the first step for the student would be to secure an internship through Career Advancement and the Metcalf program, and they will receive what's called a Metcalf award letter. The second document that they need for their CPT application is a letter from their employer that just documents a couple of different details, such as the start and the end date for the position, the job duties, the location where the work is being completed, and maybe a couple of other items. It's a pretty straightforward process, and we have a template on our website that students can provide to their employer. So once they have those two documents, they can request the work authorization through the OIA website, and it's processed within about a week, typically, oftentimes less than that. We do ask for a week for processing most types of requests that we receive. CPT is job specific, date specific, and as I mentioned, is approved by our office. The second type of off-campus work authorization for international F1 students is optional practical training, otherwise known as OPT. Probably many of you are familiar with OPT. It's typically utilized after the program end date or the I-20 end date. It can be used during the program for any type of position that is not part of the Metcalf program, although we discourage students from using it during their program if it's possible, because you are granted 12 months of OPT, and most students prefer to use those 12 months after they graduate. So any segment of that OPT that's used during the program is deducted from the 12 months in total that they receive after graduating, so something to keep in mind. Another drawback is that the application is processed by USCIS. There's a $410 filing fee. It takes about 90 days to be approved. So there's quite a bit involved in applying for OPT. At the end of the process, you receive what's called an Employment Authorization Document, or EAD, otherwise known as the OPT card, and that is actually your work authorization. So once you have a job, you become eligible for a Social Security number. Social Security numbers are only available to students that have a job. You cannot apply for a Social Security number if you don't have a job offer or work authorization. And we have a lot of detailed information on the OIA website as far as how to apply for that depending on what type of work you're doing. So, for example, if you're working on campus, there's a template that your employer can print on their letterhead, and then they will include the student's information. Then the student will stop by our office and receive an OIA endorsement at the bottom of that page, and then they can take that document over to the Social Security Administration along with the other requirements, for example, your passport, I-20 or DS 2019, those types of things. All of those documents are listed on our website, and the process is pretty simple and straightforward. For any student who is receiving taxable income but is not eligible for a Social Security number, for example, any stipend or scholarship recipient, anyone that's receiving that type of funding from the University of Chicago, but will not have a job, will need what's called an ITIN. That stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. And this is a number that's used in lieu of the Social Security number when filing taxes. And we have detailed information on how to apply for an ITIN if you're eligible on our website as well. That typically involves visiting the OIA and scheduling an appointment ahead of time to meet with the individual that processes those types of applications. You can do that throughout the year. So that brings us to taxes, which is everybody's least favorite topic. There's always that question, do I have to file US tax paperwork? And the answer is yes, every year, no matter what. All F1 and J1 students are required by law to file IRS tax forms every year, regardless of employment or income. For anybody that is not receiving any type of taxable income, there is just one form that needs to be filled out. You can find the link on our website. We also have general information in terms of how to get started with taxes on our website that you can review and that your student will want to take a look at. However, I want to preface this portion of the presentation by saying we are not tax specialists. We specialize in advising on immigration-related concerns, and trust me when I say you would not want me to advise your student on taxes and tax filing. So while we can't answer a lot of the more specific questions that are asked about filling out tax forms, we, as I mentioned before, are always happy to redirect those questions to somebody that might be better equipped to address those types of concerns. So students are more than welcome to at least reach out to our office, but just keep in mind that when it comes to actual filing and the information that's asked for on those forms, we can only provide so much feedback. Tax forms are due in April for those with income and in June for those without income. And when the spring quarter rolls around, the OIA will start sending out quite a lot of emails reminding students that forms do need to be completed. We offer some tax workshops, so that can be a very helpful place to get started as well if you've never filed tax paperwork before. And we also offer a software program that is specific to international students that, again, we'll send out emails about in the spring months. So to sort of wrap up here, we're getting to the end of this segment of the presentation. OIA provides information, answers, and questions, and provides advice pertaining to your student's immigration record. But ultimately, that's where our assistance ends. It's really up to each student to make sure that they're following those rules and regulations. Status violations can have real consequences, and it really can happen to just about anybody. So anytime there's any hesitancy or confusion or concern, students should always just reach out to us before taking any type of action that could impact their CVIS record, just to make sure that they are maintaining their status. Our office is located, I'll actually mention, I have some business cards up here which will list our our address. But we just recently moved. For any of you that maybe had students that were here in the past, we were in I House, and now we're just across the street in the press building at on 60th Street. I'm still learning the street number, which is 1427, I think. Yes, East 60th Street. So if you're around this upcoming week and you feel like stopping by to say hello, please feel free to do so. We have a couple of ways in which we communicate with students. One of the resources that is available, rather than a communication piece, is the Office of International Affairs website. So there is just a plethora of information available online. It's a good place to get started, but because there's so much information there, as I mentioned, just always feel free to reach out with any specific questions that you have about what you're reading, because it can get kind of confusing. We also have a Facebook page, facebook.com/UCOIA. Feel free to like us or check out our Facebook group online. We will post information about events going on campus and through the OIA. And then finally, we have mailing lists, and that's really how we reach a lot of students when it comes to important immigration reminders. There's the International Students Listserv, and we'll send out reminders about when busy travel seasons are approaching, or there are important announcements pertaining to anything relating to immigration. That could be presidential executive orders, things like that come up. So that's one way that we communicate with students. And we try not to spam students with too many emails, because we realize it's not always fun to receive those types of regulatory messages all the time. But I do encourage your students to just at least take a look and see if any of that information, if you at least skim through those emails, you can see if there's anything that really pertains to you. And it's just a good time to remember to pay attention to certain things, like you're approaching I-20 or DS 2019 end date, or if you're getting ready to travel, things like that. We also have the OIA Weekly Digest, which is where we send out information about events and activities for the international community and the campus at large. Our front desk provides travel signatures. You can obtain letters verifying full-time enrollment at our front desk, signatures for Social Security number letters. If you've lost your I-20 or DS 2019 and need a reprint, we can do that on a walk-in basis. And you can also schedule an appointment with an advisor. So I'm happy to meet with students in person, by phone, or by Skype, whichever is easiest. And those can be scheduled either by calling our front desk. We're moving to a system where students will be able to schedule appointments online as well. So that's to come. I believe that concludes the overview of information, and I hope it's not too overwhelming, because it's a lot to cram into a short period of time.